Okay, I apologize for being late. As often will happen, everything was set up and beautiful until 2 minutes before time. So, I'm glad we're here. This is going to be a fun day. I'm going to hang out a minute and make sure everybody finds their way in, given those technical difficulties, and hopefully it hangs together. The internet, as they say. But welcome to Friday Sips Live. One more week without Dan. He'll be back next week, so we'll be back to our normal, exciting time. Hello, Larry. Thank you for waiting. Today's going to be fun. I mentioned last week the idea that I was going to try and whittle down the whiskey collection, partly by doing a little juggling, I'll call it. I don't want the algorithms to pick up words that might suggest illicit activities, which shouldn't be illicit between friends, but anyway. So did a little juggling and was able to turn a few bottles into one. And it's this one here that I'm pretty excited about. And look, we're definitely buffering again. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with that today. The internet's poor. Xfinity sucks. Whatever that is. I guess I'll just hope everybody's there and I'm going to drink whiskey. Let me just Hey, Eric. I guess the chat's still working. I'll just assume it's buffered and we're okay. How about that? We'll just assume, because that always works out. I don't know what. Larry, tell me if you can hear everything or if it's buffering real badly or what. I don't know what to do about it other than just drink. So anyway, Kentucky Owl Batch 1 Rye. 2018, I had gone to a liquor store and ran across this bottle, the Willett Family Estate 4-year rye, which back then I didn't see that often. And so I bought one for $75. Wasn't this one. And I opened it, and it was quite good. Thank you, Larry, for the feedback. Quite good. And I went back to buy another one. But when I went in the next day to buy that other one, this bottle was here. The Batch 1 Kentucky Owl Rye. And thank you, Eric. And I bought one because I had heard of it and, didn't know what to do other than buy one. I paid $120 for it. And I came home and opened it. And it was the best whiskey I'd ever tasted in my life. And so I went back the next day and bought another one. And got my boss at the time to buy one as well. So we bought all 3 bottles that store had. As long as I drank on it, which was quite a while, it was the best bottle of whiskey I'd ever had. And I'd always wanted to get another one. I have another one because I never opened that second bottle. It's up on the shelf right there. But it gained this mythic kind of status, which is not like me not to open a bottle, and I've been unwilling to open that bottle. And so now that I have this second one, hey Scott, we're going to open it. We're going to drink it. And I was going to wait for Dan. In fact, I had all kind of grand plans on when to open that bottle. But Dan's traveling, not for great reasons, to attend a service, but along the way, he had some of this without me. So if he's going to drink without me, well, I'm going to drink without him, at least for a day. I think he'll be back tomorrow. He'll certainly be back next week. And we'll see. So the question is this still the best whiskey I've ever had? Or have I built it up so big in my mind that it can't possibly be as good as I remember? And things change. I mean, that was, I guess the last time I had some of this was probably in 2019. Things change over time. Maybe I'm not the same. And by the way, I did debate on which one to open. Should I open the one I had, or should I open the one I recently acquired? And I decided to open the one I recently acquired because its fill level was just a little bit, maybe a fraction of an ounce lower. These bottles, and this cork's pretty tight, but these bottles have a habit of the cork shrinking up, and it wasn't that snug anyway. So it seemed like this one had evaporated a bit, so I decided to open it first. Oh, poor Kim. Dan's not here to remind me. It's a little ethanol-y. But gosh, it's awfully sweet for a rye. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good. I don't know if it's as good as I remember. It's brighter than I remember. That's pretty damn good. Well, let's recap. So, I don't know how familiar you guys are with this. This is 11-year-old. At least it's 11-year-old age stated. Was it 120 the most I'd spent? If it wasn't, it was close. Because I remember thinking spending the 75 on that willet seemed like kind of a lot. But if it wasn't the most, it was certainly right up there. Oh. Yeah, anyway, 11-year-old age stated, 110.6 proof. Rumored to be Barton distilled rye, which is where, if you're a Midwinter Night Drams fan, that used to have a component that was really old. Same with Rendezvous before 2017, the High West whiskeys. Rumored to have some very old Barton rye in it. I'm not a tremendous fan of Barton bourbon, but if this is Barton rye, it's quite good. I don't know. Now I'm wishing I'd opened my bottle instead of the one I just got to make sure it was the same. It's quite good, and it's very different. I have a bunch of other rye sitting up here, and certainly we're going to stick to the Kentucky style rye. The barley rye is 51, 52, 4% rye in the mash bill. I don't know what that would compare to. Probably the closest might be this Knob Creek. Because you're at, the proof wise at 110, you got to have a little proof to live with that. I don't know. As it sits, it is rich. It is rich. What did I have to pay to get this bottle? Well, a lot more than 120. But the way the math worked out, because of the juggling I did and the arbitrage in that, where it came out a little better, around 240, I think, equivalent. So I wish I'd bought some a couple years ago, because it wasn't maybe 2 years ago or towards the beginning of the middle of the pandemic. These were still bringing about 150 or 175. So I had to go up from there. But like I said, I basically juggled some stock. So I had a little bit of gain in that department. It's quite good. Has anybody had really old rye? I mean, there used to be a lot of really old rye in the market, and there's not so much anymore. To be able to go buy any day of the week a 6-year-old, something like Pikesville, that gets to where that's kind of the older rye in the market. I think, these guys, I think, are rumored in the 8 or 9 year range, these rare breed non-chill filter. I think that'd be pretty close. That'd be good. And these, I think these are the same. These Russell's single barrel ryes, I think they're 8 or 9 years old, and they're non-chill filtered, as is the rare breed. This might be pretty close. Well, This is the second time bottles have come to the house by way of the secondary market. The first time I bought a baby sass for $25. I don't think that really counts. But this is the first time I've paid secondary, or at least even juggled to swap for secondary monies. I do not regret it at all. This is quite tasty. That's really good. So I guess a good question for you guys is, 10 years is the oldest. Yeah, it's not common. There's plenty of 15-year-old bourbons and such, which we should talk about that too, because that has flooded the market. But there's just not a lot of well-aged ryes. And I think that's because rye whiskey, while pre-Prohibition, it was the dominant spirit in America. Post-Prohibition, it's not, because so many of those distilleries that did that in Maryland and Pennsylvania never came back after Prohibition. And bourbon just sort of took over, given the quantity of corn available for distillation. But it is outstanding. And I also think that even though it's not that long ago, that when this was released in 2017, late 2017, I think. So not that long ago. If you back up 11 years from there, you're still talking about early 2000s. And I think even in between there's been a drastic change in the grain. I think the grains are so much more starchy now. So something that's 3 or 4 or 5 years old now was distilled from a much higher starch content. There's just not the same level of flavor in the grain now. The other thing is, remember this too, and that's what I want to talk about related to old bourbons. I think there's been older bourbon around longer than now. I mean, now it's just gotten common in the last year or two. Knob Creek just did an 18-year-old bourbon release. I've got up there the 15-year-old bourbon release and a 12 in the cabinet. Heaven Hill's turning out some older bourbons. I would imagine that we've all been drinking older bourbon and just didn't know it. For instance, a Wild Turkey 101 release is 6, 7, and 8-year-old bourbons typically. There was that year they put some 9 in it. I bet you they just commonly have older bourbon in that. And I've long since suspected that with Booker's. There's just no way, as good as Jim Beam is, and I don't care how special the barrels are and what a genius Booker was, there's just no way that a 6-year-old bourbon has the richness that some of those Booker's batches do. They're sneaking some 8 and 9 and 10-year-old barrels in there, I'm sure. But we don't see that with rye as much. Certainly could be the case here. An 11-year age statement simply means the youngest whiskey in there is 11 years old. I'm going to bet there's older rye in there. It is. There is a lot of oak in it. It's a super sweet oak. It is not dry or tannic at all. The finish lasts for all this time I've been mumbling. The flavor is just so good. I think that might be the thing for 2023 as it comes up. And I tried this last year. I just didn't succeed at it. I didn't really succeed at it. But I think the thing is better whiskey, even if I have to pay a little more for it. That's the practical play, right? The practical play isn't a house full of bottles you can get any day of the week, or even the economic play. I mean, I've done that. So I've got 6 or 7 Eagle Rares tucked away, and my average cost is probably $30, maybe $30. I paid $25 for some of those bottles. I've got a pile of Henry McKenna 10-year-old bottled in bonds. I think I've done that. I think next year, if I'm willing to spend whatever I decide I'm willing to spend, which it's alternate years, so next year I'm supposed to track it very closely. I do that every other year. I think I buy a lot less bottles, but I buy better bottles if they're available. And I can't, the only reason I could do this, to invest this, was because I had experience with it. It wasn't blind, right? I knew it was good. I can't do that I just can't do that in general. Whistle Pig 10. That's a fabulous whiskey, and it's available. And I bet you there's older whiskey in there, too. And I mentioned, I think, last week or the week before, if you see the Whistle Pig 10 store picks, they'll be 115 or 120, but they're barrel proof, they're unfiltered, and I mean, there's sometimes 13 and 14-year-old whiskey in those that were those barrels. I hesitated the first time to buy one of those, given the price. It was locally, it was 120 or 21 proof and $120. And I finally did it, and oh my goodness, it was so good. So I would not pass on that. Now, today's topic is more the Kentucky style rye, but for sure that's a good one. Yeah, that 12-year-old Whistle Pig is a whole different ball. Eric's talking about having the 12-year-old. It's called the Old World, I think they call it. And that one is MGP rye, and it's finished in 3 different barrels, I think, unless that's something different, because one of them was a rum barrel. But that's a different animal than the 10-year-old Whistle Pig, which is Canadian distilled. We bought one of those for one of our early whiskey nights and opened it. Paid $125 for it, and we're all terribly disappointed. Stuck the cork in it, left it alone for a month, and when we had the next whiskey night, we pulled it out, and then it was good. A little air on it did a thing, but I struggle with the finished rye thing. I think part of the reason, and I didn't think of this myself. Somebody mentioned it recently, but I think that some of the reason we're seeing an explosion in finished whiskey is that the grains just don't have the flavor that they used to, and distillers are looking for a way to get some flavor out of things. That certainly could be. It wasn't the Old World; it was a store pick. Well, yeah, that'd be. I've never seen that, but I wouldn't mind trying that for sure. Do you know, Eric? Was the whiskey itself the Canadian distilled, or was it the MGP distilled rye? Yeah, Knob Creek rye is. Does anyone know what the Knob Creek rye is or thought to be? KC rye. KC rye. You mean the Knob Creek rye, Larry? By the way, this is not going in the dump class. That's just fabulous. But let's see what taste. Let's see what might be close. And I'm going to try not to open a new bottle, because as we've already discussed, I have lots open. But for you guys, again, thank you so much. That would be amazing, because I've never seen that. If it was the Canadian rye, a couple years extra and finished in something, that would be interesting to try. I would like to see that. This is certainly on the upcoming sample list for you guys. You've been here for us, and we sure appreciate it. So, get ready. It's so good. So let's see. Nothing's going to be close to that. But I think this is going to be, and I hate to open it, but I'm going to open it. Sorry for that noise. I've got to reset. Larry, if that's the Knob Creek. So I don't remember the mash bill of Knob Creek rye, but it's going to be barely rye. I don't think they've gone back to age stating the standard 100 proof ryes yet. This one is a club pick at 115 proof. Yeah, 115. It's delicious. I think Jim Beam does a hell of a job at rye. So the rare breed rye, I think, is delicious. Stores around here have lost their mind. They're pricing this at $75 plus. It's a $50, $60 bottle for sure. And I typically will stick to my local liquor stores, but I don't know. Melissa was in Costco the other day, and this was $48. And so a couple of them did have to come home. And I love this rye. So let's see. In relation to that. It holds up. But it's rougher. And it's about the same proof. This is 112 proof. 112.2, so it's 2 proof points. I can't tell the difference in 2 proof points. And there's there is an oak up front that's not particularly pleasant in relation to how sweet this guy is. So, has anyone had the King's Family Ryconic? I've never heard of that. Never heard of that. Well, it's certainly not drinking one of my favorites, a Wild Turkey Rare Breed Rye, up against the Kentucky Owl. It's not the same experience, not the same as good a experience when it's by itself. That's crazy. I haven't heard of the King's Family at all, Eric. King's Family Ryconic. Where's it from? Give us some details on that. That's pretty. That's interesting. How different that can be. This is what I should have just gone straight to this. I love rye whiskey. I love good rye whiskey. I think the rye grain, even today with the starch content being so high, I think rye just has more flavor in the grain. I know it's harder. I believe it. I hear it's harder to distill. That's hot at 115 on the nose. Yeah, completely different. It's thinner. The flavor is good. It's nutty. I don't know. I'll bet you there's 15, 16-year-old rye in there. Maybe more. But however they did it, it did not get over oaked or tannic or any of that dryness. Oh, so I'm from Tennessee. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. Bourbon and a light whiskey. We should talk about light whiskey. That's gotten to be quite the thing. I don't know if it's a countrywide thing, but around here it's gotten to be quite the thing. And upwards of 26-year-old light whiskeys are being released through some of the smaller distilleries here. I've had a couple. They're okay, but I think people forget light whiskey was a response to, back when bourbon was, you couldn't give bourbon away. Because of the rules around American whiskey, the maximum off the still at 160, the max in the barrel at 125, the new barrels that are used barrels, it makes it more expensive to produce than something like Scotch, because Scotch can come off, I forget, 180 or 90 proof off the still. It can go in the barrel higher. They've got used barrels, so they're not, having to invest in brand new barrels. Some of those barrels have been used a couple times. And at the same time, whiskey was getting it handed to them by vodka cocktails and stuff in the 80s. And so light whiskey was, let's just make a new classification so we can come off the still at 180 or 90 proof, and we don't have any limits on what we can go in the barrel at. And we don't have to pay attention to mash bills and whatever. So I think that I find the craze of light whiskey a little funny because, it was purely a cost play, as best I can tell. Let's make something that's cheaper that we can compete with these other spirits. So they've been okay, but the whiskey geeks seem to like them because they're routinely in the 140 to 150 proof range in the bottle. And that's hot. So I don't know. I haven't had any that made me want to buy light whiskeys. In fact, I got one in exchange for doing some work with a distillery, and it was very popular here locally. So when a charity auction came up, I donated it to the charity auction because I thought that was a better use of it than me opening it and never actually drinking it, because I'd had some of it at the distillery. It was okay, but it wasn't anything I'd be interested in drinking. And it did bring a crazy amount of money for the charity, so that was good. Now, with a little time to sit, that nose is delicious. So that's, that Knob Creek rye, at a little proofier. And this one's 6 years old, almost exactly 6 years old. Yeah. I guess the moral of that story is these going to be hard to come by because, you know, you're not going to find these in a store typically. You're going to have to go hunting with friends. These still available. So store pick ryes certainly aren't as common as the store pick bourbons, but there are out there. So I would not pass on these because these are going to be in even the club. And this club, when I bought this, always had a component that was charitable. So another $10 or $15 a bottle always went to whatever charity the club was supporting. So adjusted for that, it's about a $50 bottle. No way I'm passing up any of these store picks. And frankly, when it comes to, because a store pick or a private pick doesn't mean it's good. It just means somebody picked it. So it depends on who's picking, right? I mean, you got a terrible palate or you don't know anything about whiskey. Maybe you don't pick a good barrel. But when it comes to something like Jim Beam barrels or Wild Turkey barrels, I doubt you can screw that up. So it doesn't mean it's really going to be any better than a standard release, but the standard release is 15 proof points lower and younger typically, I think. So I wouldn't pass on those because I don't know that you can screw that up like you could something like I don't know. No, Larry, you did not see any of the Kentucky Owl go in the dump class, nor will you. It was far too good for that. It is delicious, and it's got a creaminess to it, and not, I want to say fruitiness, but it's not fruity. There's something about it's bright. I don't know what that is. Maybe it is a fruit that I'm just not familiar enough to call out, but the creaminess on the mouthfeel, the richness of it, it's just so good. I can't wait for you guys to taste it. Let's see. What else might fit? You know what I might fit, given that I can't identify that fruit thing, is the Buffalo Trace Kosher Rye. This is quite good. I just recorded a back to the bottle on that. It's quite delicious, but only if you're going to drink it neat. Any amount of water seems to throw it off. I didn't try it over ice. I did try it in old fashioned. I did try it a Sazerac, and it just didn't work. And I think part of the reason it doesn't work is that there's a lot going on in it. There's a lot of flavors that the base is certainly the rye experience. It's I don't know, I'm standing in the woods and the pine trees and stuff. But there's just other things going on that make it quite delicious. It's got a lot of vanilla in it, which is weird to me for a rye. Yeah, it's just got a lot going on. There's a lot of vanilla. There's a little licorice in it. It's all the rye you think plus something. But whatever that plus is, doesn't get along well with being sweetened or bitters or even ice, when you get in a cocktail and you chill things down. So I don't know that, I haven't decided. I go back and forth. I don't know that I'd buy another one of those. I certainly tried the bourbon version. But at 50, even though it's a little different, when I do find these guys, which should be a fairly similar makeup given their common history, when I find these for 30 or 35, I'm probably going to buy these all day long because this is delicious to sip on. Obviously, it makes the right Sazerac, although I don't think you have to have this rye to make a Sazerac cocktail. It just does a lot of things right, and it costs a little less. And we know these are 6 years old. We don't really know what's going on with the kosher straight rye. But I do say if you get a chance, because they do seem to be a little hard to find, if you get a chance to buy the kosher Buffalo Trace Kosher, I would do that at least once. It's been quite enjoyable. And I think it doesn't have the lushness of the Kentucky Owl, but it's got some of that breath of, it just covers the palate. It's got a lot of flavors you don't really expect out of a Kentucky style rye. I like Friday. Delicious. Well, since I compared it to the Sazerac, Maybe when Dan's here, I slow down a little bit. Well, Dan will be back next week, so we'll be back in the garage next week. By the way, we're going to crank the podcast back up in November. Dan's going to come here on Monday, so we'll get. I don't know if we'll stick to once a week, maybe twice a month, maybe. But we're going to go back to the podcast and be a little more focused on, whatever topic we're talking about. Wow, back to back, much thinner than the kosher. I may change my mind. It's definitely more straight down the middle Kentucky style rye. So I stick to the fact that I want to use this for cocktails, but I don't know, maybe that extra $15 or so, I want all the whiskeys. Yeah, I don't know. I think I changed my mind. I'm going to buy the kosher rye every time I get a chance. I don't know if that's common around the country. I had to get it from my special club thing. It was one of the offerings from the special never going on the shelf batch, and that was what I chose that time. I don't know if that's the same around the country. Maybe that stuff sits on the shelf everywhere else. Interesting. The last thing I want to throw in there, because it's readily available, is Rittenhouse. Now, Rittenhouse is a bottled and bond rye. You can tell by the cheap bottle with the seam and the plastic cap. It's the same bottle that the mellow corn and all comes in. But it's always been solid and reliable. And they talk about Pennsylvania as its history, and I'm sure that may be the history. But of course, it's just the Heaven Hill rye, so it's the same as what Pikesville is, or it's not made in Pennsylvania, obviously, but it is tasty, and it is $25 or $6 a bottle, and it is bottle and bond, and that's a lot of things going for it. And it sips okay, but it does make a hell of a Manhattan or an old fashioned too. Yeah. Boy, I don't know what that is. But when a whiskey's done well, when it's really at the top of the echelon, like the Kentucky Owl, the sweetness of the oak becomes a thing. It's not oak. It's the sweetness related to the oak. Once you have that, even now that it's been a few minutes, there's this woodiness that comes with the rest of them that I don't notice when they're by themselves. It's interesting. Anyway, Rittenhouse is good. And it's hard to argue at Rittenhouse. So I don't want to open any more stuff because it's just getting ridiculous. But you just can't argue with that, the Wild Turkey Rare Breed. Dad's Hat. Eric asks, any opinion on Dad's Hat? I'd love to try it. I believe, though, Dad's Hat uses some malted rye in their mash bill. And one of the things early on I figured out that in most cases I do not care for is malted rye. So there's malted barley in all of this stuff, usually a little bit because it helps with the fermentation. But a lot of ryes now, if they're 100% rye, some of that rye will be malted rye. And there's something about that malted rye as opposed to the standard grain rye that I just don't care for. So I haven't ever seen it around here anyway, Dad's Hat. I would probably buy it anyway. It's not particularly expensive and try it. But it's that malted rye that I would be concerned about because it's kind of like the Whistle Pig Piggyback has got a component of malted rye, and it's got this weird, I don't know what it is about that. I don't care for it. So same thing happened when I bought the Woodford Reserve chocolate malted rye expression. I tried my best. I couldn't drink it. So anyway, I'd try it. Anybody else had the Dad's Hat Pennsylvania rye? Has anybody had any of the ryes from New York they've come up with their own designation, Empire Rye. So it's kind of similar to the bottled and bond rules, but I think 75% of the rye has to be grown in New York State. And then there's some other rules around that Empire Rye designation they've come up with. But I'd love to try some of that. I've not gotten to try any of that either. I forgot. Oh, Rittenhouse. So, before I let you guys go, ryes to drink that are going to be fun. And then listen to that, I've got this Old Forester single barrel strength rye at 128 proof. Super excited to try that. And I want to get this guy open because, I mentioned that all the Kentucky Owl started with this 4-year-old Willet rye. Once I started to see it, it was everywhere. So I bought another bottle, and I probably had this for 3 or 4 years. It's very good for a relatively young whiskey. So I'm going to open that guy soon. I'm tired of having these bottles open that have been sitting for a while. I haven't had the Old Forester for long, but we'll see. Anyway, I think that's been fun. Let's see what Larry asked. Larry wants to know where Eric shops because he always has some intriguing whiskeys to suggest. That's true. Yeah, Dad's Hat. I don't know. I've never seen it. Frankly, there's a lot of things. We have a great selection of whiskey in Colorado because it's not a control state. I think that means you get a broader selection generally. But there's just some stuff we just don't see here, and that's part of it. In fact, we don't even see the JTS Brown, the bottom shelf guy. I'd love to just never tried that. And we just recently got the Old Forester, the 80 proof bottom shelf. I've just now started seeing that out here. I don't know. It's all different. There's a lot of whiskey to try, and frankly, there's too many to try, and I don't even chase anymore, really. That I need to get back to trying to find different things to drink. But that's part of the hobby, is trying to figure out where do you put your resources, because I can't possibly keep up with all of it. But it's been fun. Next week, Dan will be back. I don't know what we'll drink next week, but we'll figure it out. So Smyrna, Total Beverages. Yeah, well, Larry, those are all places. Well, not Blackwell's in San Francisco. Not in reach. But the rest of those places you can reach. Give it a shot. Eric, Larry, Scott, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Dan will be back next week. We'll be back in the garage. Look for the podcast coming up. And remember, if you like bicycles, we do a lot of other bicycle content at Dawn Patrol, mtb.com, and slowguyonthefastride.com. So in the middle time next week, let me know what you guys might want us to talk about on Fridays. We're always trying to figure out something fun, so let me know. And those sample bottles will be here soon. We'll put some stuff up and get samples out to everybody. There you go. I need some whiskey before I just drink the dump glass. Cheers. That's pretty good dump glass this week.